October 1944 brought a deceptive calm to the Ardennes. Mist clung to the forested hills, threading through the skeletal branches like ghostly fingers, while the distant echo of retreating German units reverberated across narrow roads. Allied intelligence had confirmed what frontline units already sensed. The Wehrmacht was on the back foot. Months of relentless advances had forced the Germans into fragmented withdrawals, yet even in retreat, the enemy maintained a wary composure, concealing the full extent of their strength. For the men of the US 12th Armoured Division, the Ardennes presented both opportunity and uncertainty, terrain that favoured the defender, yet offered daring units a chance to exploit enemy misjudgments. Amid the dense forests and uneven hills, a new weapon quietly took its place on the roads and open fields: the M18 Hellcat tank destroyer. Unlike the lumbering Shermans that had dominated the European theatre since 1942, the Hellcat was a revelation of mobility and firepower in a single low-profile package. At 20 tons, it was light enough to exploit soft ground and steep inclines, yet equipped with a 76mm gun capable of piercing the frontal armour of most German medium, and even some heavy tanks at reasonable ranges. Its torsion bar suspension absorbed rough terrain with surprising efficiency, and its carefully angled armour offered some protection without compromising speed. But the true advantage lay elsewhere. The Hellcat could reach 45 miles per hour on open roads, sprinting past traditional armour in ways that would confound any crew accustomed to slower, heavier tanks. For German commanders observing the American forces from satellite positions and reconnaissance flights, these light vehicles appeared to be nothing more than Shermans or slightly upgraded half-tracks. They assumed the Americans would move cautiously, hugging forests and roads, vulnerable to the Panzer IVs and Panthers that still prowled Europe's heartland. Overconfidence was a recurring flaw in the Wehrmacht's operational calculus, a misjudgment that the Ardennes, with its tight valleys and dense woods, seemed to encourage. Lieutenant Robert Bobby Henshaw, a 29-year-old crew commander in the 12th Armoured Division, inspected his new Hellcat along a narrow spur road overlooking a shallow valley. The morning mist had yet to burn off, leaving the metal surfaces slick with dew, reflecting the pale grey light. Henshaw had already distinguished himself in Normandy and the subsequent push through Belgium, earning respect for his calm decisiveness under fire. The M18 in front of him, with its low-slung turret and angular compact frame, represented a new chapter in armoured warfare. Henshaw knew that speed, concealment, and aggressive manoeuvring would define success, not brute force. His gunner, Corporal James Jimmy Tully, polished the 76mm barrel with meticulous care, muttering numbers under his breath, calculated ranges, angles of impact, probable armour penetration at varying distances. Every man on the crew understood the stakes. In theory, the Hellcat could outgun and outrun most German vehicles they were likely to encounter here. In practice, they would need nerves of steel to exploit that potential. A map lay unfolded across the vehicle's hull hatch, its surface peppered with unit positions and movement markers. Henshaw traced a finger along a thin grey line, a German Panzer column retreating northward from Bastogne, moving in fits and starts along forest roads to avoid Allied artillery. Intelligence had identified the units as elements of Panzer Lehr, their numbers uncertain but sufficient to threaten any overconfident American advance. Henshaw's plan relied not on a frontal confrontation, something that would be suicidal against concentrated armour, but on positioning and timing, striking from unexpected angles, then disappearing before the Germans could react. The air smelled faintly of smoke and wet earth. The muted clatter of distant engines indicated that German forces were indeed moving, though slower than expected. Their vehicles, heavier and slower, would struggle on the steep inclines and narrow forest paths, a reality the Hellcats could exploit. Henshaw's crew readied themselves in silent anticipation, a mixture of disciplined focus and underlying tension threading through their conversation. The Ardennes could be unforgiving. A misjudged turn, a hidden anti-tank gun, or a sudden ambush could easily transform opportunity into catastrophe. Yet there was optimism in the Hellcat's design, in the American doctrine that prioritized initiative and mobility over static engagement. As Henshaw adjusted his binoculars, watching the sun begin to filter through the misty canopy, he imagined the possibilities. A swift strike, German armour disrupted before they could regroup, a psychological shock that might ripple through the retreating forces. It was not just a test of firepower, it was a test of manoeuvre, timing, and nerve. By mid-morning, the distant rumble of engines grew louder, confirming that the German column was approaching the valley road Henshaw had identified. Soldiers on both sides likely anticipated a conventional engagement, yet the Americans were equipped with a secret weapon, a combination of speed, precision, and tactical ingenuity that the Germans had yet to fully comprehend. The calm of the Ardennes was deceptive. Mist clung to the forest floor, sunlight struggled to break through, and the only certainty was that soon the quiet would erupt into controlled chaos. For Henshaw and his crew, it was not the firepower of the enemy they feared, but their own ability to exploit the Hellcat's strengths with perfect timing. And somewhere ahead, oblivious to the true capabilities of the vehicle watching from the tree line, the German Panzer column continued its retreat, unaware that the Ardennes was about to teach them a lesson in speed, agility, and the unexpected consequences of underestimating the Americans. By mid-morning, the German Panzer column had crested the ridge north of Bastogne, a grinding procession of steel and smoke threading through the Ardennes' narrow valleys. Panzer IVs, a handful of Panthers, and accompanying half-tracks and trucks moved cautiously, aware that Allied reconnaissance aircraft had been shadowing their retreat. Yet, for all their vigilance, they carried the weight of assumptions inherited from years of fighting in Europe. American armour, they believed, was slow, predictable, and heavily reliant on massed formations. In their minds, a direct route through the Ardennes forest offered the safest path to regroup and consolidate strength. Lieutenant Friedrich Claus, commanding one of the leading Panzer IVs, squinted through binoculars, noting the occasional glimmer of sunlight reflecting off distant American vehicles. Reports had trickled in about new US vehicles. Tank destroyers, the scouts had said, but Claus dismissed them as minor threats. "Shermans, nothing more," he muttered to his gunner. "They will slow and fall into our trap if we maintain formation." Meanwhile, Henshaw and his Hellcat crew were already in position on a hidden spur road that ran parallel to the Germans' path. Camouflaged with branches and forest debris, the low-profile M18 blended into the misty terrain. The torsion bar suspension allowed the vehicle to remain poised even on uneven ground, and the thin but sloped armour was angled just enough to deflect glancing shots while maintaining the Hellcat's blistering mobility. Every detail mattered. A single exposed turret or misaligned position could reveal them to the enemy's optics, turning advantage into fatal exposure. Corporal Tully adjusted the gun's sight and checked the range table for the German armour they expected. Panzer IVs with frontal armour around 80 mm, Panthers up to 100 mm at oblique angles. "We'll have one shot per target before they respond," he reminded the crew. Sergeant Frank Delgado, the loader, nodded silently, mentally counting ammunition and rehearsing rapid reload drills. Henshaw exhaled slowly, steadying his nerves. For all the Hellcat's advantages, victory depended on discipline and timing as much as firepower. The German column advanced with surprising speed, their confidence bolstered by reconnaissance reports that overestimated Allied caution. Trucks carrying infantry and supplies rattled along, while the heavier armour struggled on the inclines, lurching side to side as tracks clawed at soft soil. A Panther, its turret rotating continuously, appeared to scan the forest edges. Its commander, Hauptmann Weber, was determined not to fall prey to ambushes, yet the speed of the retreat left little room for thorough reconnaissance. Henshaw tapped the comms microphone lightly, voice low. All units, hold fire until my mark. Focus on the lead Panzer IV and the Panther behind it. We engage swiftly, then reposition. Speed is our weapon. His words carried the weight of both command and trust. Each crew member had to execute flawlessly. Any hesitation or misfire would nullify the Hellcat's advantage. As the German column approached a natural choke point, a narrow bend bordered by dense forest, the tension in the Hellcat crew grew palpable. Mist clung to the tree trunks, muffling distant engine noise and creating a deceptive silence. Henshaw's eyes scanned the terrain. He knew that the narrow roads meant the Germans had limited maneuverability. Here, the Hellcat could strike decisively, exploiting mobility rather than brute force. At precisely 0930 hours, Henshaw gave the signal. The Hellcat lurched forward, engine growling, suspending a moment of calculated exposure. The 76mm gun roared, tracer rounds slicing through the mist. The lead Panzer IV erupted in flame, caught unaware by the speed and precision of the attack. Tully's aim was impeccable, accounting for distance, armour thickness, and movement. In the rear, Delgado rapidly loaded another shell. The second Panzer, a Panther attempting to halt and respond, was struck squarely in its side armour. Flames and smoke erupted, feeding confusion along the column. The Germans were stunned. Their perception of American armour as slow and cumbersome shattered in seconds. Vehicles stalled, engines screamed, and radio chatter became frantic. Hauptmann Weber barked orders to reposition, but the Hellcat's mobility made this nearly impossible. Within moments, the American vehicle had shifted laterally along the forest edge, avoiding direct counterfire and appearing at multiple points in quick succession. Every time the Germans attempted to fire, they found only empty space or the shadowy form of a machine vanishing into the mist. The psychological impact was immediate. The retreating German crews, trained for decisive engagement but unprepared for a foe that could outpace and outmaneuver them, faltered. Observers later noted that entire platoons hesitated, fearing more invisible ambushes. The 12th Armoured Division's intelligence reports would record this day as a turning point, one of the first times the Hellcat's speed fundamentally altered the battlefield calculus. Even the supporting infantry felt the shock. Trucks carrying supply units became easy targets, forced to slow or retreat under indirect fire. Soldiers who had grown accustomed to advancing alongside lumbering Shermans now faced a foe that could strike and vanish almost at will. Henshaw's crew capitalized on this chaos, maintaining communication, repositioning after each salvo, and keeping the Germans off balance. Behind the tactical maneuvers, the larger strategic lesson was unfolding. The Germans' underestimation of mobility over armour, and the American emphasis on rapid, decisive strikes, would reverberate through subsequent engagements in the Ardennes. What they perceived as a minor skirmish was, in fact, a demonstration of a broader shift in armoured doctrine. Speed and precision could outperform raw firepower in specific circumstances. By 1000 hours, the German column had fragmented. The front vehicles stalled or veered off-road, while rear units hesitated, unsure how to proceed without exposing themselves further. Henshaw allowed a brief pause, giving his crew a moment to reload and observe the effect of their attack. Smoke curled into the mist, obscuring the scene, yet the evidence of disruption was unmistakable. Panzer IVs burning, supply trucks overturned, and the psychological imprint on the German forces indelible. Henshaw's calm assessment contrasted sharply with the confusion across the ridge. While the Germans expected a conventional, predictable engagement, the Hellcat had rewritten the equation. For the Americans, this was a demonstration of doctrine in practice. Careful reconnaissance, rapid execution, and disciplined repositioning could achieve effects disproportionate to the vehicle's size. For the Germans, it was a lesson in adaptability, or the high cost of failing to anticipate the unexpected. The mist began to lift, revealing the aftermath. Scorched tracks and twisted metal littered the narrow road, a tableau of chaos imposed by a single, well-handled Hellcat. Henshaw allowed his crew a momentary glance at the success, knowing the fight was far from over. Elsewhere in the Ardennes, other German units would attempt to regroup, but the lesson had been delivered. Speed, precision, and tactical ingenuity could outrun even the most disciplined retreat. By late morning, the German forces, though shaken, were attempting to reassert control of the northern approach. Hauptmann Weber's Panther platoon had finally regained cohesion after Henshaw's sudden strikes. Smoke still spiraled from the earlier attack, and scattered fires marked the path of the retreating vehicles. The Ardennes' misty valleys and dense forests made rapid regrouping difficult, but the Germans were determined. They had to maintain supply lines and establish defensive positions to cover the main retreat to the Siegfried Line. Lieutenant Henshaw, aware that the initial attack had alerted the enemy, moved cautiously along the spur road. The Hellcat's low profile allowed him to remain mostly unseen, though occasional glimpses of movement, a flicker of a turret, a trail of smoke, reminded him that the Germans were no longer unaware of his presence. "Eyes sharp," he instructed his crew. "They'll expect another strike, but they won't know where it comes from." The narrow road ahead curved sharply around a rise, creating a natural choke point. Henshaw recalled maps and aerial reconnaissance reports indicating this was a favoured route for German retreat and resupply. The terrain was ideal for an ambush. Steep slopes on either side, dappled sunlight filtering through the forest canopy, and limited avenues for rapid manoeuvre. Here, the M18's speed and manoeuvrability could decisively disrupt the enemy without relying on frontal armour strength. Corporal Tully adjusted the sights, checking the range to the approaching vehicles. A small platoon of Panzer IVs and half-tracks had appeared on the road, their pace slowed by earlier chaos. Smoke from distant fires made visibility tricky, creating shadows that could conceal either ally or enemy. Henshaw signalled his loader, Sergeant Delgado, who checked the remaining rounds. Discipline and timing would determine whether this ambush achieved its maximum effect. The Germans, still overconfident despite prior losses, advanced in what they considered standard formation. Their previous encounters with Shermans and light armour had reinforced a belief in their own tactical superiority. Hauptmann Weber, frustrated by the sudden destruction of the lead units earlier, ordered his men to hold the line and prepare for counterattack. He had not yet accounted for the extraordinary speed of the Hellcat, a vehicle that could engage, withdraw, and reappear unpredictably. Henshaw initiated the ambush with a calculated manoeuvre. The M18 advanced rapidly along the spur, engine growling, revealing itself just long enough to fire a precise round into the lead Panzer IV. The tracer streaked through the mist, striking the German tank's side armour and igniting fuel stores. Flames erupted almost instantaneously. The Panther immediately behind attempted to engage, but the Hellcat had already shifted laterally, exploiting its 45 miles per hour top speed to appear at a new firing angle within seconds. The German response was chaotic. Radio orders clashed with on-the-ground panic. Tracks churned mud as vehicles attempted evasive manoeuvres, yet the narrow road limited options. One half-track skidded off the edge into a ditch, effectively immobilized. Soldiers scrambled from vehicles, guns raised, only to find that their supposed target had vanished behind a rise, engine and exhaust fading into the forested cover. Henshaw's crew maintained perfect coordination. Tully aimed, Delgado loaded, and the driver, Private Jameson, adjusted speed and positioning in near silence. Every second counted. The Hellcat's light 20-ton frame allowed it to dart between trees and around bends, exposing only the turret and gun briefly, while its 76mm gun delivered devastating precision. Each round struck vehicles' flanks or lightly armoured sections, maximizing destruction while minimizing exposure. The psychological effect intensified. German crews, trained to rely on massed armour formations, now faced an enemy that could seemingly appear anywhere along the road. Observers later reported that morale plummeted. Soldiers who had previously executed retreat maneuvers with confidence now hesitated, fearing hidden threats. Panic compounded the tactical disadvantage. Trucks carrying fuel and ammunition stalled or veered off-road, leaving supplies stranded and vulnerable. Despite the success, Henshaw knew the engagement was far from over. More German reinforcements were advancing from the rear. Using pre-planned repositioning routes, the Hellcat moved again, taking advantage of the forest's natural cover. From elevated positions, Henshaw's crew could monitor enemy movement without exposing themselves unduly. They used the M18's speed not only as an offensive tool but as a shield, allowing rapid withdrawal and redeployment. Meanwhile, Hauptmann Weber attempted to adapt. He ordered supporting infantry to secure the flanks and coordinate with remaining armour to trap the elusive vehicle. But communication was fragmented. Radio channels were clogged with reports of burning vehicles, stalled trucks, and unresponsive units. The Germans' attempts to predict Henshaw's movement repeatedly failed. For every angle they secured, the Hellcat appeared at another, striking with uncanny precision. By noon, the ambush had wrought severe disruption. 3 Panzer IVs were destroyed or disabled, 2 half-tracks immobilized, and multiple trucks burned. The main Panther platoon had slowed, conserving fuel and avoiding exposure to unknown threats. Henshaw allowed a brief pause to assess the situation, noting both the physical damage inflicted and the chaos sown among the German ranks. The Ardennes terrain, once considered an impediment to American armour, had become an ally when combined with tactical acumen and the Hellcat's mobility. Henshaw radioed the 12th Armoured Division headquarters, reporting the initial engagement and requesting artillery observation for follow-up strikes. Intelligence had predicted German retreat routes with reasonable accuracy, and artillery could now exploit the confusion, further compounding German losses. The M18's role was clear: delay, disrupt, and create opportunities for broader Allied manoeuvres. The Germans, increasingly aware of their misjudgment, began to adapt, but at a cost. Vehicles moved cautiously, columns stretched over longer distances, and commanders delegated authority to small unit leaders to respond individually rather than in cohesive platoons. Henshaw observed this dispersal with interest. It validated the principle that speed and precision could amplify tactical disruption, even against numerically superior forces. By late afternoon, the ambush had effectively dictated the terms of engagement. The German retreat continued, but at a reduced pace, their cohesion undermined. Henshaw's crew had expended nearly half their ammunition, yet the impact of their strikes extended beyond the immediate losses. Fear, uncertainty, and confusion travelled faster than steel, forcing German commanders to reconsider standard doctrines for armoured retreat. As the sun began to lower, casting long shadows through the Ardennes trees, Henshaw allowed the crew a moment to rest, the low hum of the engines signalling vigilance rather than ease. The ambush had been a success. One M18 Hellcat, wielded with discipline, had outpaced, outmanoeuvred, and outgunned retreating German forces in a way few had imagined possible. The event would later be recorded in division histories, veteran memoirs, and post-war analyses as a defining example of mobility triumphing over armour. Yet Henshaw knew the war was far from over. Other columns would attempt similar manoeuvres, and the Germans would adapt lessons quickly. Today's ambush was a testament not only to technology, but to training, coordination, and the courage to exploit opportunity amidst uncertainty. In the Ardennes, calm would not last long. The storm had only begun to build. The forest echoed with the distant rumble of engines and the acrid stench of burning fuel. The once orderly German column had become a broken string of steel fragments stretched thin across the narrow Ardennes roads. Vehicles burned or lay abandoned, crews scattered, and supplies spilled into ditches. Yet at the centre of this disarray, the formidable Panther tanks attempted to restore order. Hauptmann Weber, commanding from his Panther's cupola, tried to mask his frustration. He had fought the Red Army's swarms on the Eastern Front and prided himself on discipline under fire. But this was different. There was no clear enemy to fix in his sights, no static front to reinforce. Instead, the Americans struck like shadows, fast, elusive, and devastating. "They do not fight like Soviets," he growled to his radio operator. "These are hunters, not brawlers." The Panthers' 75mm KWK-42 gun had long been a terror to Allied armour. At range, it could pierce Shermans and Churchills with ease, but its greatest asset, firepower, was only effective when the enemy stood still. Against an M18 Hellcat, speed rendered the gun nearly irrelevant. Henshaw's vehicle never gave the Panthers time to aim. Instead, it appeared, struck, and vanished before the German gunners could traverse their heavy turrets. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Henshaw guided his Hellcat along another forest track, studying the enemy through binoculars. He could see the Panthers now, massive angular silhouettes, their armour glinting dully in the afternoon sun. Unlike the Panzer IVs, these beasts would not fall easily. Their frontal armour could shrug off the M18's 76mm rounds, and even side shots required careful aim. Yet Henshaw knew their weakness. The Panther was powerful but ponderous, its cross-country mobility limited by its weight, its turret slow to traverse, and its reliance on open fields of fire, a liability in the Ardennes maze of trees. "Keep low," Henshaw instructed his driver, Private Jameson. The Hellcat hugged the tree line, engine purring softly. Corporal Tully adjusted the gun sight, calculating angles. Sergeant Delgado checked the ammunition stores, armour-piercing rounds carefully stacked, each one a chance at survival. Every crewman understood the stakes. Against Panthers, mistakes were fatal. The Germans, for their part, attempted to bait the Americans. Weber ordered 2 Panthers forward as decoys while others held back, waiting to ambush when the elusive Hellcat revealed itself. Infantry fanned out, sweeping the woods with rifles and machine guns. The Luftwaffe was absent, air superiority long since lost, so the burden of countering this threat fell squarely on the armour. At 1400 hours the trap was sprung, but not as Weber intended. The forward Panthers advanced cautiously, turrets scanning, when Henshaw's Hellcat darted from cover with a sudden roar. The M18 accelerated to over 30 miles per hour in seconds, an unheard-of speed for a tracked vehicle. Before the Germans could react, Tully fired. The round struck the lead Panther's side, just beneath the turret. Sparks flew, then smoke as the tank lurched to a halt. Its crew bailed out under rifle fire from supporting American infantry hidden along the ridge. The second Panther rotated to engage, its massive guns swinging like a predator's head, but by the time it fired, the Hellcat was gone. The shell exploded harmlessly among the trees, splintering trunks but finding no target. Weber clenched his fists in frustration. He had underestimated the Americans again. "This is not possible," he hissed. "No tank moves that fast." From a new position half a kilometre away, Henshaw's crew reloaded and prepared another strike. This time they aimed for the Panther platoon's rear, where support vehicles clustered. Supply trucks and fuel carriers were easy prey. Within minutes, explosions rocked the column, black smoke billowing skyward. German infantry scattered, shouting warnings of "Schnell Panzerjäger," fast tank destroyers. The term would linger in their reports, a grudging acknowledgement of the Hellcat's unique threat. For the Americans of the 12th Armoured Division, the effect was electrifying. Word spread quickly through the ranks that the new tank destroyers could not only fight but outrun the feared German armour. Infantrymen who had once dreaded the sight of Panthers now cheered as the Hellcat streaked across the battlefield, spitting fire and then disappearing before German guns could retaliate. Morale surged, bolstered by this demonstration of speed and audacity. Yet victory was not without risk. The thin armour of the M18 meant that even a glancing hit could turn it into a blazing coffin. Henshaw never allowed his crew to forget it. Every manoeuvre had to balance aggression with evasion. They were predators, but predators could become prey if careless. "We move fast, strike fast, and vanish faster," he reminded them. "Our strength is not in armour, but in never being where they expect us." As the afternoon wore on, the Panthers' frustration boiled over. Weber ordered a blind barrage into the woods, shells tearing through trees and earth. The forest shook with concussions, but the Hellcat was already repositioned miles away, leaving only smouldering wrecks as proof of its passage. The Germans wasted precious ammunition and fuel, commodities already scarce in late 1944. Each futile shot underscored their inability to match the Americans' new tactics. By dusk, the German column was in shambles. Panthers remained formidable, but their aura of invincibility had cracked. Crews spoke in hushed tones about the American vehicle that struck with the speed of a phantom. Reports filed later that evening described a tank destroyer capable of outrunning our armour and exploiting every weakness of terrain. For a Wehrmacht accustomed to dictating armoured doctrine, the shock was profound. For Henshaw's crew, the day ended in silence. They parked the Hellcat in a concealed grove, camouflage nets draped carefully over the turret. Exhaust hissed softly as the engine cooled. Inside, the men shared a can of rations, their faces lit by the faint glow of a shielded lantern. They were exhausted but alive, a testament to discipline and daring. As night settled over the Ardennes, the chaos they had wrought lingered. German supply routes were crippled, armoured units delayed, and morale shaken. One American vehicle had reshaped an entire sector of the front. In after-action reports, senior officers would note that mobility, not armour thickness or gun calibre, had dictated the day's outcome. The Hellcat had proven that speed could be as decisive as firepower. And for the Germans, the message was unmistakable. Their retreat would no longer be unchallenged. In the dark forests of the Ardennes, the hunters were waiting. Dawn broke over the Ardennes, with mist curling through the forest, the quiet a fragile veneer over the shattered remnants of the German retreat. The previous day's chaos had left roads littered with burnt-out trucks and overturned Panthers, yet for Lieutenant Henshaw and his Hellcat crew, the hunt was far from over. Reports from American scouts indicated that a fragmented German force, comprising elements of the 2nd Panzer Division, was attempting to regroup several kilometres to the north. Henshaw's Hellcat was refuelled and rearmed, ready to exploit the enemy's disorganisation. Unlike heavier tanks, the M18's light 20-ton frame allowed it to traverse narrow forest tracks that would have stalled Panthers and Tiger tanks. Its torsion bar suspension absorbed bumps and roots with surprising grace, and the 45 miles per hour top speed was more than sufficient to outpace any German retreat column. Henshaw understood the tactical advantage. The Germans expected American armour to lumber behind, providing cover for infantry. Instead, the Americans were now the shadow, moving faster than the eye could follow. "Stay alert," Henshaw said, scanning the tree line with binoculars. "They'll try to form a blocking position. We hit hard, hit fast, and we don't stop until they break." The first encounter came just after 0900 hours. A small group of Panzer IVs and SDKFZ, 251 half-tracks, attempted to establish a roadblock at a junction near the village of Büllingen. Henshaw's Hellcat surged forward, engine roaring, as Tully aligned the 76mm gun. The first shot struck the lead Panzer 4 in its side, penetrating the relatively thin flank armour. It erupted in flame, forcing the crew to abandon their vehicle. German soldiers fired back from the woods, rifles cracking, but the Hellcat's speed allowed it to duck behind a ridge and reposition before the next volley could reach them. Henshaw coordinated with supporting infantry, who used the distraction to flank the German vehicles. In less than 20 minutes, the junction was cleared, and the retreating Germans were forced onto narrower, more treacherous paths. The psychological effect was immediate. German crews began reporting the Americans' uncanny mobility. "A single tank appears, strikes and vanishes," one officer later noted in a post-war interrogation. "It is as if the forest itself moves against us." These reports reached higher command, sowing unease. The speed and unpredictability of the M18 challenged long-held doctrines, which emphasized heavy frontal armor and coordinated formations. Henshaw pressed the advantage, moving east along forest tracks, cutting off another column of half-tracks and supply trucks attempting to escape. Using high-speed hit-and-run tactics, the Hellcat struck vehicles at the flanks and rear, targeting fuel and ammo carriers first. Explosions tore through the undergrowth, forcing disorganized soldiers to abandon their vehicles and flee on foot. By midday, the American crew had covered over 10 kilometers, an extraordinary feat for a single tank destroyer unit. Despite their successes, the risks were ever present. The thin, angled armor of the M18 meant that even glancing hits from Panzer 475mm guns could be fatal. Henshaw constantly reminded his crew speed was their shield, but any lapse could be disastrous. Communication with infantry spotters and adjacent armoured units was critical. A wrong turn could isolate them deep in enemy territory. By late afternoon, the pursuit had drawn the Germans into an open clearing near the Our River. Here, the Panthers could theoretically bring their guns to bear, but the Hellcats were already at work. Using dense tree cover, Henshaw's crew moved rapidly along the perimeter, striking vulnerable rear sections of German tanks and forcing crews to abandon positions. The Americans never lingered. Each strike was designed to maximize disruption while minimizing exposure. As dusk fell, the retreating German forces had lost cohesion entirely. Convoys were broken, communications interrupted, and morale shattered. Officers later reported that the constant harassment by fast-moving tank destroyers had slowed their regrouping plans, leaving units vulnerable to subsequent Allied infantry and artillery attacks. Henshaw parked the Hellcat in a concealed grove for the night. Exhausted but triumphant, the crew shared rations and reviewed the day's actions. Every strike had been a calculated risk, every maneuver a test of speed, coordination, and nerve. The pursuit had demonstrated a new principle of armoured warfare. Mobility could dictate engagement, even against heavier, better-armed enemy tanks. As the forest darkened, the men listened to distant artillery and the occasional motorized clatter of remaining German vehicles. The Ardennes front remained dangerous, but Henshaw and his crew had carved a path of disruption and terror through the retreating enemy. In post-action reports, the impact of the Hellcat's speed would be emphasized repeatedly, highlighting a simple but profound lesson. Sometimes, the fastest tank wins not through sheer firepower, but by being everywhere the enemy fears most. By the morning of October 19th, the remnants of the German 2nd Panzer Division had coalesced near the Our River, seeking to use the natural barrier as a defensive line. Reconnaissance reports indicated that their objective was to establish a temporary bridgehead, regroup their armoured vehicles, and facilitate a coordinated retreat northward. For Lieutenant Henshaw and his Hellcat crew, the intelligence presented both opportunity and risk. The river crossing offered a choke point where mobility could be leveraged, but the concentrated German forces meant that even the fast M18 could not simply outrun well-placed fire. Henshaw studied the aerial photographs provided by reconnaissance planes. The narrow clearing along the western bank of the Our River was ideal for an ambush. A single-lane bridge spanned the river, flanked by steep embankments and wooded areas. By positioning the Hellcats along the flanks, they could target the flanks and rear of German vehicles attempting to cross while remaining partially concealed by trees and foliage. "We hit them in the bottleneck," Henshaw said to his crew. "Speed is our advantage, but patience will be our weapon." The American infantry had arrived in support, establishing concealed firing positions along the eastern bank. They coordinated with Henshaw via radio, using pre-arranged signals to indicate when the first vehicles reached the bridge. The plan hinged on synchronized timing. The Hellcats would fire the opening salvo, targeting lead tanks and supply trucks, forcing the Germans to halt on the narrow bridge, where infantry and artillery could engage with lethal effect. By mid-morning, the German column appeared. 4 Panthers led the convoy, followed by a mix of Panzer IVs, half-tracks and supply vehicles. German crews, exhausted from days of retreat, had little expectation of encountering such rapid and aggressive opposition. As Henshaw's Hellcat crew observed from the tree line, Tully adjusted the gun sights and whispered, "This is going to be messy." At Henshaw's signal, the M18s surged from cover. The first shot struck the lead Panther in its side armour. The tank shuddered, flames licking its engine compartment, and its crew abandoned the vehicle under the sudden shock. Panic spread backward through the column. German tank commanders attempted evasive manoeuvres on the narrow approach, but the confined space left little room for error. The Hellcats moved with precision. Using torsion bar suspension and the 45 miles per hour top speed, Henshaw and his crew dashed between firing positions, each shot targeting a vulnerable flank or rear plate. The Panzer IVs attempted to return fire, but the thin, angled armour of the M18, combined with constant motion, made them difficult targets. Every burst of tracer fire revealed enemy positions, which Henshaw's crew memorised for subsequent strikes. Infantry coordination proved decisive. Rifle and machine gun fire raked the halted German vehicles from concealed positions along the bank. Soldiers threw grenades into abandoned half-tracks, destroying fuel and ammunition stores. The chaos amplified as German drivers realized that retreat was impossible without exposing themselves to concentrated fire. The bridge became a death trap, recalled a captured German NCO after the war. We could not move forward, and every second of delay meant more of us burned or were captured. For nearly 2 hours, the ambush unfolded. Henshaw's Hellcat crew remained in constant motion, exploiting speed and surprise while maintaining communication with infantry and supporting artillery. Ammunition was carefully rationed. The 76mm gun was precise, targeting command vehicles and fuel carriers before lighter vehicles. When a Panther attempted to reverse off the bridge, Henshaw fired a precise shot into the treads, immobilizing it completely. One by one, German vehicles were either destroyed or abandoned. The psychological impact was as significant as the physical destruction. German survivors described the M18 as ghosts of the forest, appearing and disappearing at impossible speeds. Reports to High Command noted the unprecedented mobility of American tank destroyers, whose effectiveness lay not in armour thickness, but in tactical exploitation of terrain, speed, and surprise. "We expected lumbering Sherman tanks," wrote a German lieutenant in his post-war memoir. "But what confronted us were vehicles that struck and vanished before we could react." By late afternoon, the river crossing was effectively neutralised. Henshaw's crew had destroyed or immobilized 7 tanks, 3 half-tracks, and multiple supply vehicles, while American infantry and artillery completed the devastation. The surviving German soldiers surrendered or fled into the forest. The success of the ambush demonstrated the synergy between mobility-focused armour and coordinated combined arms tactics. Exhausted but elated, Henshaw parked the Hellcat on a ridge overlooking the river. The crew assessed the damage and recorded their actions for after-action reports. Every decision had been a balance of speed, precision, and situational awareness. The ambush illustrated a growing principle of armoured warfare in the late-war Western Front. Speed and tactical ingenuity could offset the limitations of lighter vehicles, even against formidable enemy armour. As dusk settled, Henshaw wrote in his log, "The river crossing taught a lesson the enemy will not soon forget. One fast tank destroyer, used wisely, can paralyze a whole division. Today, we were that tank. Tomorrow, we must be faster, smarter, and always a step ahead." The Ardennes remained unpredictable, but the ambush at the Our River had established a clear reality. The Hellcat was no mere support vehicle. It was a mobile predator, capable of reshaping the battlefield through speed, precision, and audacity. The morning after the ambush at the Our River, the Ardennes forest was quiet, save for distant artillery echoes and the groaning of abandoned German vehicles. Lieutenant Henshaw and his Hellcat crew, still high from their success, prepared for the next phase, exploitation. With the German column in disarray, American forces had an opportunity to push deeper into enemy-held territory, cutting off retreat routes and disrupting communications. However, Henshaw knew that the Wehrmacht would not accept defeat silently. A counterattack was inevitable. Reconnaissance patrols reported movement along the eastern ridge. A combination of Panzer IVs, Jagd Panthers, and mechanized infantry. German officers, enraged and determined to reclaim lost ground, were attempting to consolidate their remaining strength. The 12th Armoured Division's command issued orders. Hellcats would spearhead the advance, using speed and maneuverability to harass retreating units, while infantry followed to secure the roads and flanks. Coordination was critical. The Ardennes' narrow roads and steep ridges limited manoeuvre space, making speed both a weapon and a potential risk. Henshaw's crew loaded fresh rounds into their 76mm gun and checked the torsion bar suspension. The M18's lightweight, 20-ton frame and 45 miles per hour top speed made it ideal for hit-and-run tactics, but any miscalculation could expose the thin armour. "We're not just running fast, we're running smart," Henshaw reminded his crew. He emphasized reconnaissance, use of cover, and constant radio communication. By mid-morning, the Hellcats moved out. Henshaw led 3 vehicles along a serpentine ridge road, flanking a narrow valley where intelligence suggested German supply trucks were regrouping. The crew spotted enemy infantry digging foxholes and camouflaging Panzer IVs among the trees. Henshaw calculated the approach carefully. A frontal assault would be costly, but a flanking manoeuvre combined with coordinated artillery fire could decimate the position without exposing the Hellcats to prolonged enemy fire. At Henshaw's signal, the Hellcats accelerated along the ridge, disappearing and reappearing behind trees like spectres. The first Panther was engaged from an unexpected angle. The 76mm shell penetrated its side armour, igniting ammunition inside. The remaining German tanks scrambled to respond, but the Hellcats' mobility rendered their return fire largely ineffective. Each shot was deliberate, targeting command vehicles, fuel carriers, and immobilized tanks to maximize disruption. American infantry advanced in tandem, following pre-designated routes. They moved cautiously, knowing the Germans could attempt ambushes along the valley. When enemy machine gun nests fired from concealed positions, Henshaw's crew redirected fire, suppressing the nests and allowing infantry to advance. Coordination proved decisive. The combination of fast-moving tank destroyers, disciplined infantry, and artillery support prevented the Germans from establishing a cohesive defence. Around noon, the Germans launched their expected counterattack. A formation of 6 Panzer IVs and 2 Jagd Panthers advanced from the north, attempting to cut off the American Hellcats. Henshaw assessed the situation quickly. The terrain favoured mobility, the ridge offered sight lines, but the valley constrained enemy manoeuvring. Instead of retreating, he ordered a series of hit-and-run strikes. The Hellcats would engage briefly, then relocate, forcing German vehicles to react defensively. The engagement became a deadly chess match. The Hellcats' speed allowed them to fire, reposition, and strike again before the German tanks could aim accurately. Tracer rounds illuminated the forest, briefly revealing the attackers' positions, which Henshaw memorized for follow-up shots. When a Jagd Panther attempted to climb the ridge, it exposed its engine compartment to the 76mm shells, and Henshaw's precise fire disabled it. "One at a time," he whispered. "Keep them chasing ghosts." The psychological effect on German crews was profound. Reports later described US tank destroyers as phantoms striking unpredictably and vanishing before counterfire could be effective. The combination of speed, accurate gunnery, and terrain mastery amplified the Hellcats' combat effectiveness beyond their light armor. For the Americans, maintaining momentum was crucial. Each destroyed vehicle increased pressure on German forces, disrupting command chains and creating confusion. By late afternoon, the counterattack faltered. Henshaw's Hellcats had destroyed 3 Panzer IVs, a Jagd Panther, and several supply vehicles. The remaining German tanks retreated in disarray, abandoning wounded or damaged comrades. American infantry secured the valley, collecting prisoners and salvaging equipment. Henshaw radioed division command with a concise report. Enemy forces disrupted, advance secured, minimal American casualties. The engagement underscored a key principle of late-war armoured warfare. Speed, tactical ingenuity, and coordination could outweigh raw armour and firepower. While the Germans possessed formidable tanks, they were slow to react and vulnerable in constrained terrain when faced with fast-moving, well-directed tank destroyers. Henshaw's after-action notes emphasized mobility, terrain exploitation, and psychological impact as critical elements for success. As dusk fell over the Ardennes, Henshaw observed the battlefield from the ridge. The destruction was evident: crumpled German tanks, abandoned supply trucks, and scattered infantry positions littered the valley. Yet beyond the tangible victory, the psychological message was clear. American forces could strike decisively, even against superior enemy armor, if speed, precision, and coordination were applied effectively. Exhausted but determined, Henshaw logged his reflections. Today proved that a Hellcat, used with strategy and speed, can break the enemy's will as effectively as it breaks armor. We're not just a weapon, we're a disruptor. Tomorrow the Ardennes will remember that mobility can outmatch might when skill and courage lead the way. By nightfall, the 12th Armoured Division consolidated positions, preparing for continued pursuit. The Germans, now aware of the Hellcat's capabilities, adjusted their tactics, attempting to avoid open roads and predictable movement. Henshaw understood that the battle was far from over. The Ardennes remained a complex theatre of engagement, where terrain, weather, and intelligence could turn victory into disaster. Yet for the first time, the potential of the M18 as a decisive fast-strike weapon had been proven in sustained combat, setting a precedent for the remainder of the campaign. By the morning of October 28, 1944, the dense Ardennes forests around Houffalize were a patchwork of shattered roads, shell-scarred trees, and abandoned vehicles. The German retreat had slowed, and intelligence indicated that a concentrated counterforce, including remnants of the 116th Panzer Division and mechanized infantry, was consolidating in preparation for a defensive stand. Lieutenant Robert Bobby Henshaw's 12th Armoured Division had pushed hard through the region, and now the Hellcats were tasked with leading the assault to clear the final resistance and secure the vital crossroads that could enable the Germans to regroup further north. Houffalize itself, perched on a ridge overlooking the river valley, presented a tactical challenge. Narrow cobblestone streets, steep inclines, and a mixture of stone buildings and wooded ridges made traditional armoured manoeuvres difficult. The Germans had fortified key positions with tank ditches, field artillery, and anti-tank guns. Reports from reconnaissance patrols suggested at least 8 operational Panzer IVs, 3 Jagd Panthers, and multiple Flak 88 emplacements, all prepared to hold the town as long as possible. Henshaw knew the only way to succeed was to combine the Hellcats' mobility with careful reconnaissance, coordinated artillery, and aggressive infantry support. The morning fog was thick, limiting visibility to just a few hundred yards. Henshaw's crew performed final checks. The torsion bar suspension on each M18 Hellcat groaned under the weight of supplies and ammunition, but the engines were tuned and radios functioning. Henshaw reviewed the attack plan. The lead Hellcat would provide reconnaissance and first strikes, flanking vehicles would exploit openings, and infantry would follow to secure buildings and neutralize anti-tank positions. Timing would be critical. As dawn broke, the first Hellcat rolled forward along the ridge road, engine muted under the fog's cover. Henshaw's crew spotted the glint of Panzer IV periscopes and heard the faint metallic clatter of infantry in buildings. The German forces, though battered and retreating, were prepared to exploit the terrain and delay the Americans at all costs. Henshaw radioed for artillery support, marking coordinates on the map with precision. The first salvo fell behind enemy lines, obscuring the defenders' ability to coordinate and providing the Hellcats a narrow window to strike. The first engagement was brutal but brief. The lead Hellcat, using speed and stealth, struck a concealed Panzer IV from its weak side armour. The 76mm shell penetrated cleanly, igniting the vehicle and forcing the remaining tanks to reposition defensively. The Germans responded with flak 88 fire from the ridge above, but Henshaw anticipated this and executed a high-speed flank manoeuvre. The Hellcats leapt from cover to cover, their light frames hugging ditches and forest edges. Each strike was precise. Command vehicles, fuel trucks, and artillery emplacements were systematically eliminated. American infantry advanced in coordination with the tank destroyers. Engineers cleared mines along the cobblestone roads, while rifle squads moved methodically through buildings to neutralize machine gun nests. Coordination was key. Houffalize's narrow streets left little room for error. A misstep could expose the Hellcats to concentrated fire, but Henshaw's leadership ensured constant communication, directing crews to shift positions and suppress enemy fire before it could become lethal. By mid-morning, the engagement escalated into a combined arms battle. German infantry attempted to flank the advancing Americans using buildings as cover, while Panzer IVs and Panthers tried to hold the ridge overlooking the town. Henshaw's Hellcats, however, remained mobile. Using a zigzag approach along side streets and tree lines, they delivered devastating flanking fire. A Panther attempting to anchor the German line was hit from the side by a 76mm shell, exploding and scattering its crew. Panic began to ripple through the remaining defenders, who had not anticipated such speed and precision from what they assumed were slower, vulnerable American vehicles. The psychological impact of the Hellcats became evident. German reports, later captured in post-war interrogations, described US tank destroyers as ghosts of the forest, striking unpredictably and vanishing before counterfire could be effective. Commanders tried to rally troops, but visibility was low, communication lines were disrupted, and the constant movement of American vehicles prevented cohesive defensive coordination. Henshaw capitalized on this confusion, ordering rapid advances to exploit weak points in the German lines. By early afternoon, the town itself was partially secured. American infantry held key crossroads, and the remaining German armour had either been destroyed or forced to withdraw northward. The Hellcats continued to harass retreating units, targeting command vehicles and supply carriers to disrupt regrouping. In one notable incident, a single Hellcat engaged 3 Panzer IVs attempting to block a road exit. Using superior speed, the vehicle fired, repositioned, and fired again, knocking out 2 tanks and forcing the third to retreat under cover. Witness accounts later described the maneuver as impossible for a single vehicle, highlighting the tactical ingenuity enabled by the M18's design. Despite the success, the engagement was not without cost. Several Hellcats sustained minor damage from artillery and small arms fire, and American infantry incurred casualties while clearing buildings and suppressing anti-tank positions. Henshaw himself was shaken when a nearby explosion threw debris into his vehicle, briefly obscuring visibility. Yet the crew's training and discipline allowed them to maintain momentum, keeping the pressure on the Germans. By late afternoon, Houffalize was effectively under American control. German forces, demoralized and disorganized, retreated further north, abandoning positions that had once been fortified with artillery and armour. The 12th Armoured Division's engineers quickly repaired roads and cleared minefields, preparing for the next phase of the Ardennes campaign. Henshaw's after-action report emphasized the decisive role of mobility, coordination, and terrain exploitation, Speed allowed a small number of vehicles to achieve disproportionate results against numerically and technically formidable opposition. Post-battle assessments highlighted several critical lessons. The M18 Hellcat's light armour, while vulnerable, was offset by its mobility, allowing crews to dictate engagements and minimise exposure. Coordination with infantry and artillery magnified its effectiveness, and the psychological impact on German troops, who expected slower, lumbering American armour, was significant. Houffalize became a case study in how manoeuvre warfare, precision strikes, and integrated forces could overcome conventional defences, even against experienced and well-equipped opponents. As dusk fell, Henshaw surveyed the town from the ridge overlooking Houffalize. The streets were littered with debris, the forest edges dotted with abandoned German vehicles, and American flags fluttered from captured command posts. Exhausted but resolute, he reflected on the campaign's significance. We proved that speed, strategy, and coordination could redefine the battlefield. The Hellcat isn't just a vehicle, it's a statement. And today the Ardennes learned that lesson the hard way. In the coming days, reports from Division Command confirmed that the capture of Houffalize disrupted German supply lines and delayed their regrouping. The success of the Hellcats in mobile engagements influenced future US armoured tactics, emphasizing the integration of fast tank destroyers with infantry and artillery to exploit both terrain and enemy expectations. Houffalize would be remembered not only as a tactical victory, but as a demonstration of how innovation, mobility, and leadership could overcome even the most formidable defences in the Ardennes' unforgiving terrain.